psychology of total control rarely begins with force. That's what makes it dangerous. The most effective forms of control happen slowly, psychologically, so subtly that people often believe they're making their own choices the entire time. No chains, no threats, just influence, dependency, fear, validation, repetition. And before they realize it, their thoughts, emotions, routines, and decisions no longer fully belong to them. History is filled with people who mastered this: political leaders, cult figures, intelligence agencies, corporations, manipulators in relationships, all understanding the same uncomfortable truth. If you control someone's mind, you rarely need to control anything else. And the frightening part is, most people never notice the process while it's happening. So before we go deeper into this, subscribe to the channel and share this with someone who still believes control always looks obvious. In 1954, a psychology researcher named Solomon Asch conducted an experiment that revealed something deeply disturbing about human nature. He placed a group of people inside a room and showed them a simple image, several lines of different lengths. The task was easy. Participants only had to identify which lines matched in size. Almost impossible to get wrong. But there was a catch. Everyone in the room except one person was secretly part of the experiment. And when the moment came to answer, the group intentionally gave the wrong response. Then something strange happened. The real participant, fully aware the answer was obviously incorrect, often agreed with the group anyway. Not because they were stupid, because human beings fear social isolation more than they fear being wrong. That experiment exposed one of the foundational principles behind total psychological control. People are easier to influence than they think, and history repeatedly proves it. Most individuals imagine control as something aggressive. Dictators barking orders, armed soldiers enforcing obedience, obvious manipulation. But the most powerful systems of control rarely operate through visible force alone. They operate through psychology, through emotional conditioning, through repetition, through fear of exclusion. And once those mechanisms are understood, controlling behavior becomes disturbingly efficient. Look at propaganda throughout history. During the 20th century, governments across the world invested enormous resources into controlling public perception during wartime. World War II posters, speeches, films, newspapers, all carefully designed to shape emotions before shaping actions. Why? Because emotion drives obedience faster than logic. Fear creates compliance, anger creates unity, repetition creates belief. The human brain naturally trusts familiar information more over time, even when that information is misleading. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. Repeated exposure increases perceived credibility, and powerful institutions understand this extremely well. That's why modern control often feels invisible. You are not always told what to think directly. Instead, environments are created that slowly influence what feels normal, acceptable, desirable, or dangerous. Social media platforms shape attention. Advertising shapes desire. News cycles shape fear. Algorithms shape perception. And most people underestimate how deeply repeated emotional exposure affects their thinking, because psychological control works best when the target believes they are completely independent. That's the illusion. True control doesn't feel like slavery. It feels like choice. This is also why cult leaders throughout history rarely begin with domination immediately. They begin with emotional connection, belonging, certainty, and identity. Individuals are slowly isolated from conflicting perspectives while emotional dependency increases over time. Control is built gradually, step by step, thought by thought, emotion by emotion. And the frightening reality is that human beings are neurologically vulnerable to this process. The brain constantly seeks certainty and belonging because uncertainty creates stress. When someone offers simple answers, strong identity, emotional validation, or protection from fear, people naturally gravitate toward it, especially during chaos. That's why periods of economic collapse, social instability, or uncertainty often create opportunities for highly controlling figures to rise. Fear weakens critical thinking. Emotional desperation increases suggestibility. History has shown this repeatedly, but total control doesn't only exist in politics or large systems. It happens quietly in everyday relationships too. Some individuals control partners through emotional dependency. Others use guilt, isolation, manipulation, affection, or fear of abandonment. Gradually, the victim begins adjusting behavior constantly to avoid emotional punishment. And often, they don't even realize how much of themselves they've surrendered until much later. That's the terrifying part about psychological control. It rarely feels dangerous in the beginning. It feels comforting, necessary, even loving, because the strongest forms of control don't attack identity immediately. They reshape it slowly until resistance disappears naturally. And once you begin understanding these psychological mechanisms, you start seeing how much of modern life is built around influence, conditioning, and emotional management. The most unsettling part about total control is this. People often defend the systems controlling them, not because they're weak, because psychological conditioning changes perception over time. Once someone becomes emotionally attached to an idea, a group, a leader, or even a routine, the brain begins protecting that attachment automatically. Contradicting information feels uncomfortable, threatening information feels personal, and slowly, logic becomes less important than emotional security. That's how control sustains itself, not through force alone, through identity. Psychologists have studied this for decades. Human beings naturally seek consistency between beliefs and behavior. When those beliefs are challenged, the brain experiences psychological discomfort, what researchers call cognitive dissonance. Instead of admitting manipulation, many people unconsciously defend the system harder because accepting the truth would damage their sense of certainty. And certainty is addictive. That's why powerful organizations, manipulative individuals, and ideological movements all focus heavily on emotional reinforcement. Repetition, community, fear of outsiders, shared identity, emotional reward systems. Because once identity becomes connected to obedience, questioning feels dangerous. Look at highly controlling relationships, for example. In the beginning, manipulation rarely appears obvious. A manipulator may start with excessive affection, emotional closeness, constant validation. Gradually, criticism increases. Isolation begins subtly. Emotional dependency deepens. The victim slowly loses confidence in their own judgment and starts relying more heavily on the manipulator's approval. And by the time control becomes visible, psychological dependency already exists. That's why people from the outside often ask, why didn't they just leave? But control is rarely physical first. It becomes mental, emotional, tinal. The victim begins policing themselves automatically. That's real psychological domination. And modern society contains countless softer versions of the same mechanism. People are constantly influenced through emotional pressure, social approval, fear of exclusion, status anxiety, outrage cycles, and algorithmic conditioning. Entire industries compete for your attention because attention eventually shapes thought patterns. The more emotionally reactive someone becomes, easier they are to influence. That's why emotional discipline matters so much. The ability to pause before reacting, to question emotional impulses, to think independently under pressure. Those skills protect psychological freedom, because the moment someone fully controls your emotional state, they begin influencing your decisions, and repeated decisions shape identity. This is why independent thinking feels increasingly rare today. Most people absorb opinions emotionally before analyzing them rationally. They repeat ideas because they sound socially accepted. They fear disagreement because rejection feels psychologically threatening. But individuals who resist psychological control usually share certain traits. They tolerate uncertainty. They question emotional narratives. They observe patterns calmly instead of reacting impulsively. And most importantly, they remain emotionally difficult to manipulate. That doesn't mean becoming cold or paranoid. It means becoming aware of how influence works, aware of how fear shapes behavior, aware of how repetition affects perception, aware of how emotional dependency weakens freedom. Because once you understand the psychology behind total control, you stop surrendering pieces of your mind so easily. You become more careful about what influences you, what you consume, who you trust, what emotional environments you stay inside. And slowly, you regain something many people lose without noticing: mental autonomy, the ability to think clearly without constant external control. And in a world built around influence, distraction, emotional pressure, and endless psychological noise, that may be one of the most valuable forms of power left. If these conversations make you see human behavior and society differently, stay connected to this channel. There's always another layer beneath what most people accept at surface level. Until next time, protect your attention, question emotional pressure, and never underestimate the power of independent thought.